All right. Tim Carney is the commentary editor at the Washington Examiner and a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He's the author of Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse, which is out now. Tim, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So what's the answer? Why do some communities thrive and others collapse?
The short answer is it has to do with the little platoons, as Edmund Burke would put it, or it's got to do with institutions of civil society, strong communities. We sometimes hear a purely economic explanation of the suffering of the working class in the middle of the country, but that skips a very important step. People do well in places that have churches, that have swim clubs, that have strong public schools with very involved parents. And so when you look at the suffering of the working class, when you look at opioid deaths, when you look at teenage pregnancies, when you look at the retreat from marriage and all of these problems, the root cause of them is a loss of connection because it's a loss of strong institutions of civil society.
So it's not the economies destroying the families; it's actually the families destroying the economy. Is that
No, it's the economy. When a factory closes, that's often the first domino to fall. But the next step is the diner that served the factory closed down, and people aren't able to meet and get together with their neighbors. And then the active involved parents get up and leave, and so the public school becomes less of sort of a great hub of civil society bringing people together. And then next thing, the church closes, and so then people are left alienated. Families, individuals are left without the connection that these things provide. In some places, though, they can weather an economic downturn. I was just in Western Michigan, in Grand Rapids. They got hit by the auto collapse in 2008 a lot, but they weathered that downturn because the churches, the schools, the community institutions, the museums, all of those things sort of kept together families, kept up human capital, kept up education quality. And so then lots of other businesses, as quickly as possible, resettled in a place like that. That doesn't happen in a lot of rural America because there isn't that thick, dense web of strong institutions of civil society.
All right, I want to get back to that in just a second, but a lot of people, especially on the right, I've heard these kind of tough guy remarks about people like this. Kevin Williamson is the famous one. Let these societies die. They behave badly. This is the kind of dysfunction that we see in urban Black communities, and we don't like it there, and we shouldn't like it here, to be fair. What's wrong with that assessment?
So it's consigning a lot of people to sort of the despair. I mean, you can't. Well, there are some places that are dead, and so the Kevin Williamson argument is you should get up and leave them, and there's probably a good argument to be made about that. But I would say that the places that are on the decline, they can be stopped before they hit rock bottom. But what it will take is something of a great awakening, something of a revitalization of the strong institutions. These are things that are being killed by secularization. Technology has lots of great things and some harms. Being crowded out by big government saying, oh, we'll take care of feeding all the poor. And then the local government, the churches, those things don't have as much of a role. If we can stop that sort of erasing of these institutions, a lot of these places can be turned around.
Okay, but these things don't come out of nowhere. I mean, it's not that long ago. It's within my memory, which only goes back a couple of hundred years. But I mean, it's not that long ago when you thought of the Midwest and you thought about mom and dad, you thought about churches, you thought about this. This was the kind of thing that people in New York would scoff at, that they were so moral, that they were so straight-laced, that they were so boring in their lives. And now we suddenly find out, and it took everybody by surprise on the coast. We suddenly find out that these people are in despair, that they're not, they're not getting married.
They're not going to church.
They're not going to church. What happened?
So there's a lot of causes of this. One, we should mention a failure on behalf of the institutions, the churches. I'm a Catholic. My church has failed spectacularly in not taking care of its people and not dealing with abuse cases right. And other churches, I think, have failed by either welcoming the crowding out by the government or becoming overly politicized. And tons of other institutions have failed too, including public schools, et cetera. But there are lots of outside forces that are killing it. And one of the huge ones is big government. When big government comes in, it crowds out the welfare spending by churches and nonprofit organizations. And there's a push of secularization on the left saying that churches should not be in the public square. You're not allowed to bring your religion into the marketplace. That's what the Hobby Lobby case was about, was the Obama administration arguing, no, you do not get free exercise of religion once you step out into the marketplace. ACLU suing Catholic hospitals out of business because they don't perform abortions. There's an effort to say religious institutions shouldn't be out in the public, and that's killer, because when we're talking about civil society, for the middle class, the core institution always has been church. The cover of Alienated America is a broken down church, because Tocqueville noted it 200 years ago. He said that the church doesn't run government there, but it is the most important political institution and social institution in America is the church.
You know, one of the strange things is, though, that the church retained a lot of power even into, say, the 1920s and 1930s, even though it was breaking down in communities. Communities were not as religious as the church was. But I'm thinking because I work in Hollywood, I'm thinking of the establishment of the Hayes office. That was a minority of people who wanted that movie code to be put into place, but they forced it because they had moral authority in the society. How did they lose that? I mean, why is it that this push for secularization was so successful?
Many books have been written about this. Mary Eberstadt, who's a wife of a colleague of mine at AEI, she wrote that the collapse of family helped contribute to the collapse of church. I think that's true, but I also try to argue that it goes the other way around, that churches, the most important thing that these institutions do was never preaching, this is how you ought to live your life. That only carried weight when they were doing the other work of building an infrastructure, building a ecosystem in which you can raise families. Raising kids is really hard. My wife and I, we have 6 kids. We would not be able to do that without strong communities around. I tell lots of stories like that in the book. But one of the things is when the churches stopped, either because of government crowding out or just a change in emphasis, whenever institutions aren't sort of doing what they can to serve families and individuals, help them live out their fullest lives, then they lose an authority, a sort of moral authority to preach. Preaching only carried weight when it was backed up by deeds, and churches today do not do as much of that building of the infrastructure as they used to.
One of the things I've noticed, I've written this article that's going to be in the next City Journal about a phenomenon I've noticed where several intellectuals, especially in Europe, where they feel that the society is basically being overrun and destroyed, they say, we have to retain our Christianity, but I myself cannot believe. So, I hear this a lot. There's a philosopher named Marcello Pera who talks about, he had a book called Why We Should Call Ourselves Christians, but not why we should be Christians. Douglas Murray has written this book, The Strange Death of Europe, where he says, without religion, we're not going to get back. And I just asked him flat out, do you believe? No, I just can't. Is there something that maybe science has done, maybe the modern world has done, that just has actually undermined Christianity, old-fashioned religion, in ways that we simply can't heal?
Well, first of all, what you're pointing out, it's a broader phenomenon of sociologists realizing that religion is important, and specifically attendance. So that's one of the arguments, that it's belonging to something where you are engaged in a joint higher purpose, and it's very important. There is something about the modern world, though, with lots of other I used to describe it as we've got so many other creature comforts. And one of the explanations of people falling away from churches, well, people don't want to sign on to like the idea of waiting until you're married to have sex and that sort of thing. And so now that there's more access to video games and sex and delicious food, we have other pleasures that drag us away. But then I look at the most secularized parts of America, the places where it's happened the quickest. It's not the wealthy elites who are these decadents. No, it's the struggling middle class who, what they're doing, A, they are having less sex in and out of marriage. B, these are the parts of the country that are suffering the most. So it's not that great, fun, good times has dragged this away from church. That's sort of like an analogy to college, right? That's when a lot of college kids don't go to church because they're having too much fun on the weekends. That's not happening on the large scale.
Yeah.
It's depressing and dank in most of the places where the secularization is accelerating at the highest rate.
It's amazing. It's almost as if the elites sold this idea of secularization to the poor, then went back to church while the poor just went down the drain.
Yeah, no, it's religion, Marx said, was the opiate of the masses. Yeah. I'm saying, no, this is a high-end drug that the top 20% are more likely to be in church on a given, or synagogue or mosque or whatever, on a given Sunday than the bottom 20%.
That's really interesting. So Do you have any solutions? What's the way back?
We need a large federal program. No, I'm joking. There is no big solution. There are some. So the most important thing Donald Trump is doing is stopping the sort of the effort to push the church out of the public square. And so that's got to keep going. Most of my solutions, like the 10 Commandments, are thou shalt nots. But really, it's going to take. There are a bunch of little solutions. We have to. When you build a place, you have to build it around people, not around cars. That would help. People who have money, a lot of them, you put it into building up institutions that bring people together and give them a sense of purpose. Churches are going to have to reform in a lot of ways. A lot of Southern evangelical churches are overly politicized. The Catholic Church is not taking head on its abuse crisis. And I think when it does, that'll be the first step towards building up more priests, finding new roles for the laity. But really, it takes a million, as a wise woman said, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a million people in their town. It's like being more involved in realizing that while it may seem like you're going to get your happiness and that you can, be a good neighbor just, over electronically or in your own home, you really do have to build up institutions that reach out to neighbors and give people a sense of purpose, give people a private mini safety net, all those things. So there is no big solution because a big federal program would undermine itself.
Yeah, no, that sounds frighteningly realistic. Tim Carney, the commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, really good paper, by the way, visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the author of Alienated America, Why Some Places Thrive While Others Collapse. Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.